Paper 14 Module 2, Indian Linguistic Tradition, Introduction to Contents 1. Introduction 2. Language and Speech 3. Organization of Language 4. Pre-Paninian Linguistics 5. Panini 6. Summary 1. Introduction. In this module, we continue with a brief exposition of the various aspects of the nature of language that inform the thinking of Indian grammarians before Panini. It ends with the main features of Panini's grammar, the Astadhyayi. 2. Language and speech. Thinking about language originated in the Vedic literature with its innumerable reflections on sabda, language, its nature, its constitutive elements, and its relationship to the mind and the reality it talks about. It is asserted that life, breath, and mind are the two roots of speech. The second Aranyaka describes prana, breath, conscious and unconscious energy that supports life, to be at the root of speech and designations, on which the knowledge of the whole universe rests. The relationship of inhaled, life-supporting breath and speech language comes in for more reflection. The third Aranyaka tells us that Kauntarva saw a union of speech and prana, vak pranena samita iti Kauntarva, 3.1.6. Further, we are given the insightful observation that, when one recites or talks, breath enters speech and speech swallows prana. On the other hand, when one entertains no idea or is in deep sleep, then speech dissolves in breath, prana swallows speech. 3.1.6. Breath and mind are intimately related and the mind follows the course the breath takes. 3. Organization of language. Another issue that engaged the minds of the Indian grammarians was the question of how language is organized. This is the parts versus the whole controversy so familiar to us in modern psychology, aesthetics, and philosophy. The controversy has a long history and it boils down to deciding what is the basic linguistic unit, varna, sound, pada, morphological construction, or vakya, sentence. Coming virtually near the end of this debate, Bhartarhari, 5th century AD, upholds the holistic position and says that vakya sphota is primary in the production and reception of meaning and asserts that the vakyavadins, those who regard the sentence as the indivisible unit, consider words to be imaginary abstractions from the sentence. BP 3.1.1. B.K. Matilal explains, what holds at the syntactic level also holds at the semantic level. Thus in the beginning of the 4th chapter of the 3rd book Bhartarhari rephrases his theory as follows: for the grammarians, i.e. for the vakyavadins, the word meanings are fictitious constructions from the sentence meanings, which are to be regarded as wholes, just as for the padavadins, the meanings of roots and suffixes are mere abstractions from the indivisible word meanings. The sentence meaning, according to Bhartarhari, is an indivisible samvit, one whole cognitive content, from which different word meanings, also called ontological categories, are abstracted for imaginative construction. Logic, Language and Reality 1985, page 379. However, though indivisible, the sentence appears to have divisions just as our complex cognition, though one appears to have inner differentiation because of the objects in it. Patanjali's view is that the samhita is the natural, or prior, or essential, or independent text and the padapatha is man-made, i.e. contingent. But there is evidence for the existence of a strong patha tradition from the earliest times. As Professor G. B. Paulsel's work shows, there were pre-Paninian dhatu pathas. We also know that the samhitas were broken down into padas, which were then put together in different permutations, jatapatha, ganapatha, kramapatha, etc. as devices to maintain the texts inviolate. It appears, therefore, that before Panini, grammatical analysis based itself on padas. To account for padas was to account for language. The phoneticists also held this view, witness the R.K. Pradasakya, which uses 281 technical terms to sort out various facets of the construction of samhita patha from padapatha. Only later, perhaps, enabled by Yaska's work, the grammarians reached the conclusion that vakya, a propositional utterance, is the proper unit of language analysis. Akandapaksa. The ritualists, those who believed in the efficacy of mantras properly articulated, the metricians, and the musicians by virtue of their object of study could have been in possession of this insight before the grammarians. Panini made this the foundational principle of his grammar, hence the centrality of karaka in his framework. 4. Pre-Paninian linguistics. Pre-Panini period was the phase of phonetics, etymology, lists, lexicons and morphology. During this long period, phonetics was the first science to develop in response to the need to preserve intact, to articulate accurately and to transmit exactly the Vedic mantras. The phoneticists' chief contribution, however, and one that contributed significantly to the science of grammar, is their hard, precise analysis, description and classification of speech sounds on the basis of place and manner of articulation and their description and classification of process and principles of sound change in context. This had enabled Yaska the etymologist to account for language change, in the sound shape of the form in the course of its derivation from the root, dhatu to the final form nirukta. Their work, and that of Yaska, is the foundation of Panini's morphophonemic description of Sanskrit. Further, the phoneticist structural analysis of speech sounds as bundles of phonetic features made possible the Pratyahara Sutra, the Pratyahara siglas and the sophisticated Sandhi rules, morphophonemic rules, of Panini's grammar. The patha tradition is definitely pre-Paninian. Patha is enumeration, and Sanskrit grammarians prepared classified lists of verb roots, dhatupatha, nominal stems, ganapatha, suffixes, pratyayas, prefixes, upasargas, indeclinables, nipata and avyaya, and of nouns for gender marking, linga. Besides, the Samhita continuous texts were analyzed into pada and permuted in various combinations of increasing complexity to be memorized as such to facilitate the exact reconstruction of texts at any point of time. These enumerations of basic or ultimate constituents could be made only on the basis of exact phonetic and morphological analysis. These enumerations are kinds of first lexicons and their morphological knowledge is presumed by Yaska in his Nirukta. In his discussion of theory, Yaska sets up the four parts of speech Nirukta 1.1-1.11 nama nominal akyata verb upsarga prefix nipata indeclinable that are then assumed by Panini in his grammar. His pada vibhaga, the four parts of speech, is, in today's terminology, a morphosyntactic classification. His work has direct relationship with Panini's analysis of language. Yaska connects in his etymologies Nirvakana, the sciences of phonetics and morphology on the one hand and morphology and sentence grammar on the other. He is a semanticist, a votary of knowledge and opposed the phoneticists who believed that correct articulation of the mantra was sufficient and one did not need to understand the meaning. Working in the high tide of post-Mahabharata war materialist skepticism that had declared the Srutis as meaningless Nirarthaka because of their opacity and symbolism and ineffective ethics, he set about the task of interpreting the Vedas through a science of exegesis. He compiled an exhaustive list of opaque words, collected all the instances of their use in the texts and set about the task of determining their meaning by deriving them from verb roots that in Sanskrit have fixed meanings. In the process, Yaska has taken up many issues of theoretical interest. In discussing why words become opaque, he talks of language change and variation, over time and space and identifies lopa deletion, vikara modification, viparyaya metathesis, and agama intrusion, as the kinds of sound change that can take place and cites examples of variation in usage in the region from Afghanistan to Assam Nirukta 2.1-2. Discussing the nature of meaning, he describes 6 modifications of becoming, and says that words are used to designate objects, with regard to everyday affairs in the world, on account of their comprehensiveness and minuteness. Nirukta I.2 and describes philosophic, social and psychological factors that influence meaning. Nirukta 2.3, 3.3-3.5, 3.18. He discusses the 3 types of hymns and their 7 subjects Nirukta 7.1-7.3 and goes on to discuss the philosophy of God's approaching, a philosophy approaching a kind of monism Nirukta 7.4-7.6. Above all he laid down the principles of interpretation and around these a whole science of exegesis developed culminating in Mimamsa Sutra. Most of his etymologies are remarkably modern and his principles and method are unimpeachable Nirukta 2.1-2.3, 3.10, 3.19 for example. From the point of view of grammar, in 1.1-1.4, he discusses the parts of speech and reduces the entire vocabulary into 4 grammatical types pada nama nominals, substantives, akyata verbs, upasarga prefixes, and nipata indeclinables. He also gives their subtypes on the basis of meaning and use. Panini's grammar assumes these 4 parts of speech for the formation of padas, morphological constructions that are divided into 2 sets, sup those ending in nominal inflections, and ting those ending in verb inflections, and are formed by a process of attaching the pratyaya affixed to prakrti base, the 2 core elements of language with which Chomsky came to an end of his linguistic speculation. 5. Panini 5.1 Model of Paninian grammar. Panini cites 10 earlier grammarians and his Astadhyayi 7th century BC, is the fruit of this grammatical tradition and has exercised deep influence on subsequent thought and as noted above, functioned as a model to describe other languages. The goal of grammar is to judge the sadhutva, acceptability, of pada, linguistic constructions. The rules of grammar act as a filter and allow successful derivation of only sadhu pada, acceptable forms. The model is an affixation model in which different kinds of affixes are attached to different kinds of bases, under different contexts and conditions in a hierarchy to yield the final derived form. Sabda blank, underscore, blank, subanta tinganta nominal affix ending, verbal affix ending, blank, 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 prakrti base pratyaya, su affix prakrti base pratyaya, su affix blank, 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 underscore 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 blank, blank, derivati. Inflecti. Basic derived derivational inflectional basic derived derivational inflectional. Blank, blank, KRT Karaka Lakara Tadita Vakana Samasa Purusa. The grammar has 1 core and 5 ancillary texts. Sutrapatha core body of rules Dhatupatha list of verb roots Ganapatha list of nominal terms Pratyahara Maheshwara Sutra structured sets of sounds Varna of Sanskrit Unnati Sutra rules for idiosyncratic forms. The Sutrapatha, called the 8-chaptered, has 3,995 sutras rules arranged in 8 chapters. The ancillary texts are also carefully structured and are preliminary to the Sutrapatha. On the authority of Kasika we know that the grammar came down in 3 recensions, Trivida Patha, A. Prasya B. Udikya C. Dakshinatya basis for Kasika in Kashmir used by Katyayana, as already noted, it was composed in Samhitapatha, 1000 slokas and, it is said, was announced by Panini in Ekasrutasvara. Patanjali calls Astadhyayi, the great system of Panini perfectly accomplished. The system has 5 texts, I. Maheshwara Sutras, enumeration of the sounds of Sanskrit in 14 structured sets. E. The Sutrapatha proper, approximately 4,000 aphoristic statements. E. Dhatupatha, the classified enumeration of verb roots in 10 sets. IV. Ganapatha, the classified enumeration of nominal stems in 254 sets. V. Linganusasanam, gender assignation to nouns that are not assigned gender by rules inside the grammar. 5.2 Grammatical analysis. Assuming an internally complex norm in utterances, Panini's grammar accounts for the internal structure of pada, the inflected word or compound. The utterance set it accounts for is the language size set and also the various dialects that are included in the set. The Vedic textual usage v.3.109, the geographic variety v.3.32, the historically earlier usage v.1.123, 127, 130, language of the Chandas v.1.126, of the contemporary texts v.1.65, 129, the uninterrupted flow of speech v.3.114 et. Seek. The ritual speech v.4.141 and the speech of Sista. Its object language is both Vedika and Laukika. Mahabhasya 1.1, both the language of the texts and the contemporary, current speech, Bhasa. But then Vyukarana is SMRTI of the Parampadam, as well, of the structure of the language that is articulated in so many different forms, uses and varieties. 3 kinds of equipment are available. I. Lexicons outside the grammar, Sutrapatha. E. Lists inside the grammar, and E. Rules or sutra that are functionally of 7 kinds. Adhikara 3.11, Samshna 1.2.45, Parabhasa 1.1.3, Vidhi 3.2.123, Nizda 1.3.4, Niyama 3.4.111, Adadesa 1.1.55. The following lists and lexicons are available. Lexicons lists referred not nominal verb root to in referred related, grammar, to in grammar, Upsarga derivational and Dhatupatha Linganusasana Nipata inflectional affixes Ganapatha derivational and inflectional pratyaya affixes. It is obvious that these lists are preliminary to the rules as all this information is accessed by rules. The tradition refers to all the grammatical operations by the term pada vidhi, or pada siddhi, i.e. the grammar shows, demonstrates the structure and the building up of 7 kinds fully inflected morphological constructions. 5. There is an obvious internal order 6 among the operations enjoined by sutras. First there is derivation of bases and then, inflection. Again the inflection of nominal bases must precede in sequence the inflection of verbal bases. The prakarana krama order and treatment of topics of astadhyayi becomes intelligible in the light of these dependencies. At the conceptual level, the rules or clusters of rules operate in 5 phases. I. Identification of a unit by matching, or by markers. E. Naming or designating the unit. E. Operations required by the designated term, affixation of x, y, z, etc. IV. Modifications that follow replacement, deletion, elision. V. End product and the cycle begins again. A particular theory informs this grammar. Though Panini, an exponent of the great rationalist tradition, does not talk of that, it is Patanjali who explains by answering several questions in his Paspasanika. The salient points in brief are, I. The object language is both the spoken language Bhasa and the textual compositional language of the Vedas. E. The purpose is to characterize all the wide range of forms, those that are dusta deviant, emlika non-native, mithya non-existent, and sadhu invariably accepted. They are characterized by nizda, proscribing aposabda, or by vidhi, prescribing sabda, or by both prescription and proscription. E. It is laid down that as the universe of deviant forms is unending, sabda upadesa, injunction of forms accepted in usage, is to be preferred as it is economical. But new forms are being created all the time. How to account for them? So, grammar is set up as a samanya vaisasa, general particular treatise, a set of finite injunction and exception rules which with finite effort, alpa yatnana, will account for infinite mahata smiley face. Linguistic forms. IV. The authority for the forms established is siddha as loka, worldly usage. 5a from the nominal base pratipadika 1. Subanta purusa 2. Stri pratyaya kumari 3. Tadita matura b from the verb root dhatu 4. Tinganta pathati 5. Kridanta karaka, pathitva 6. Kirtiya pratyaya pathitavyam c from 2 nominal bases 7. Samasa devagram 6. For details please see my paper Panini's Ashtadhyayi, Questions of Theory and Order. Professor S. M. Katur Felicitation Volume 51-52. 1991-92. Pune, Deccan College, 1993. Verses. But then if loka is the authority pramana for forms, then what does the grammar do? It is to lay down dharmaniyama, its dharma being to ensure successful transfer of meaning from the speaker to the hearer. Towards the attainment of this dharma it lays down sadhu forms as niyama to exclude emlika, apasabda and dusta sabda 7. Bhartarhari pointed out that all hearers make sense of the deviant forms because they have in their mind the sadhu forms. Patanjali's definition of sabda explains this: form in the mind, that which when articulated brings to the hearer's mind the cognition of an object is sabda. The Astadhyayi inspired a long tradition of diverse, grammatical thinking and work in the form of recensions, commentaries, reorderings and the philosophy of grammar. The continuous cumulative tika parampara come right down in Sanskrit to 18th-19th century Najesa Bhatta of Karnataka and Swami Dayananda Saraswati, and in modern Indian languages to Yudhishthira Mimamasic, in English to S.D. Joshi and Rudbergen. It inspired many grammars. In the early centuries of the era it influenced Persian, and through Persian the Arab grammar. In India, Kandra Vyakara 4th century AD is a Buddhist non-terminological recension of Astadhyayi. A Tibetan grammar was prepared by Thonmi Sambodha in the 7th century AD. In the 11th century AD, Hemachandra Acharya prepared a grammar of Prakrit modeled after Panini. Grammars of Kannada and Malayalam were also composed. A 20th century grammar of Hindi, P.T. Kishoridas Vajpayee's Hindi Sabdanusasana is modeled on Astadhyayi's analysis. It is the object of study in many European and American universities that have produced celebrated scholars of, apart from other areas, Sanskrit grammar. 6. Summary. The second module continued with an introduction to the Indian grammatical tradition by looking at other aspects of the thinking of Indians on language. As a more direct background to Panini, you had a glimpse of pre-Paninian linguistics. Finally, the model of the Astadhyayi, Panini's grammar, and its influence on other grammarians was briefly discussed. 7. There is some division of opinion about what they exactly stand for. There is no room here to present all the arguments, but on the basis of the discussion one may define these as follows. 1. Emlika Prayoga is the usage of the non-native speakers, the language of the foreign countries, of the lands that lie outside the limits of Aryavarta. 2. Apasabda is any of the dialectal variants, and 3. Dusta Sabda is an inaccurate or deviant usage caused either by physical infirmity or ignorance.